wear the pike upon your shoulder at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. Wear the pike upon your shoulder at the rising of the moon. How the many with the wall cabin noise watching through the night. Many a manly heart was beating for the blessed morning light. Murmurs ran along the valleys to the banshees' lonely croon, and 1,000 pikes were flashing by the rising of the moon, by the rising of the moon, by the rising of the moon. And 1,000 pikes were flashing by the rising of the moon. All along that singing river, that black mass of men was seen. High above the shining weapons flew the round beloved green. Death to every foe and traitor, whistle out the marching tune. Hurrah, me boys, for freedom, 'tis the rising of the moon. 'Tis the rising of the moon, 'tis the rising of the moon. Hurrah, me boys, for freedom, 'tis the rising of the moon. Well, they fought for poor old Ireland, and full bitter was the fate. Oh, the glorious pride and sorrow fills the name of 98. Yet thank God there still is beating hearts and manhood burning noon, who would follow in their footsteps at the rising of the moon. By the rising of the moon, by the rising of the moon, who would follow in their footsteps at the rising of the moon. By the rising of the moon, by the rising of the moon, who would follow in their footsteps at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. For the Greeks must be together at the rising of the moon.
He gave Ireland a clear and precise and worthy concept of nationality. But he did more than this. Not only did he define Irish nationalism, but he armed his generation in defense of it. Thinker and doer, dreamer of the immortal dream, and doer of the immortal deed. To his teaching, we owe it that there is such a thing as Irish nationalism. And to the memory of the deed he nerved his generation to do, to the memory of 98, we owe it that there is any manhood left in Ireland. For myself, I would rather have known this man than any man of whom I have ever heard or ever read.
So Wolfe Tone is a fascinating character. And the most incredible thing about him is what Patrick Pearse said about him. And again, another secret nobody knows about Patrick Pearse. His father was a Unitarian. He was from a mixed background. And he said about Bodenstown and Wolfe Tone's grave, at his grave, that we are in the holiest place in Ireland, holier even than that of where Patrick sleeps in Down. And yet he said, with his own words, that this grave of a Protestant is the most important place in Ireland.
Every year there's a pilgrimage to there by various Republican groups, but just remember, you don't have to be a part of those Republican groups. Wolfe Tone belongs to absolutely everybody. Of Protestant, Catholic and Dissenter, we are all equal. We're all together in this. And it's only because we were together in it that we came damn close. We did come damn close a couple of times, 1786 to 1798, to actually freeing this country.
And it shows that all of these revolutions, they're not isolated instances. 1916 is part of something that went before it, and that starts with 1798. It leads to 1803, 1848, 1867, the 1880s, 1916 War of Independence, and tragically the Irish Civil War. It is part of a jigsaw, and all of these people are part of that jigsaw.
It all goes back to the American Revolution and the liberty, equality, fraternity that was involved in that, which then went from America to France and then on to Ireland. And we nearly achieved it in 1798 with the United Irishmen, who Catholic, Protestant and Dissenter. Where will you get a better ethos than that? So why wouldn't those guys of 98 be the inspiration for any guys that were coming down the line after that?
It's Ireland's attempt to define itself at a period of revolutionary change.
So they would have seen this as their opportunity to change the world and to get rid of the old regime and replace it.
We have an idea that between 30 and 50,000 casualties of the 1798 rebellion.
That there were 45 battles in 1798.
What world were we living in before 1798? Well,
This was the flag of Ireland under Cromwell. It was basically the Union Jack with a small little harp in it. And what he did was he divided up most of Ireland between his captains and members of his army. And at the same time as this, there was a thing called the penal laws. And the penal laws were appalling. They also applied, I didn't know this, to Presbyterians. So only the Anglican Church, only the Protestant Anglican people were free of the penal laws. And they were the ascendancy. Rich Anglican landowners, known as the Protestant ascendancy, controlled the country. Catholics and Presbyterians could not run for election and had to pay a religious tax to the Anglican Church. Catholics had to deal with the penal laws, and Anglicans lived in country and city mansions such as Leinster House, where the Dáil is today.
The Irish peasantry were living in far harsher conditions than in France.
The penal laws were outrageous. An Irish Catholic was forbidden the exercise of his religion, forbidden to receive education, forbidden to enter a profession, forbidden to hold public office, forbidden to engage in trade or commerce, forbidden to live in a corporate town or within 5 miles thereof. Believe it or not, Clane was a corporate town. Wolfe Tone said he didn't even know any Catholics growing up. He didn't even see them. You literally couldn't come within miles of the town. You could pretty much say that Irish Catholics were slaves in their own country. They couldn't do anything. And basically, they had to do everything outdoors. The Irish Catholic population did everything outdoors, mass outdoors, education outdoors, the hedge schools, etc., etc. A Catholic was forbidden to purchase land, forbidden to lease land, forbidden to vote, forbidden to keep arms for his protection, forbidden to hold a life annuity.
And after the other plantations prior to that, after Cromwell's sojourn in Ireland.
And then William of Orange came along, after whom the Orangemen are named, and he did even better. He got rid of Clare, he took Clare as well, and then all the Catholic and original indigenous people's landmass was basically here and bits of elsewhere.
The circumstances in which the rebellion occurred were there was still a huge animus between the Catholic population and the planted population. After the Orange success at the Battle of the Boyne,
set up his leaden statue, and once a year they all came down to shout at Annie Patu.
The Presbyterians in the north were also afflicted by the penal laws to a certain extent. They didn't have the same rights as the Anglican community.
all order of Presbyterians or Protestants who were not Anglican or Church of Ireland were also under the penal laws. They also suffered on this.
They were also upset by the continuous wars that the British were involved in, which affected their trade. And they were very hard-working people, and they wanted to export their goods to France. So Britain, being at war with France all the time, interfered with their commercial interests.
Sure.
And this was the genesis of their antipathy to British rule in Ireland.
So who were in the ascendancy? Well, they were called the ascendancy, the Protestant ascendancy, ladies and gentlemen. And this was the centre of their world. Trinity College, College Green, and of course, the Parliament building.
In the Parliament there were 300 MPs, all of the Protestant ascendancy, and they were the politicians. They were the ones who ran the country, and they were generally the richest people in the country. The head of this Parliament was Henry Grattan, who was a liberal kind of a person for his time. He wanted Catholic emancipation and wanted to grant things to Catholics to make their lives easier. He was from the liberal wing of things. He was mainly stopped in his tracks a lot of the time by the more conservative elements. The Speaker of the House was Speaker Connolly, and here's how they were so rich, these people. His house was Castletown House.
Peace then, ye blasphemers of liberty's name, though the sword of your fathers were red in her cause.
However, things were about to change for the whole world. In 1770 was the Boston Massacre and the beginning of the American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution was interesting from the point of view that it was initially about trade.
What was happening was that trade could only be done through England at any time. If America wanted to export something to Ireland, it had to go through England.
This was what started everything, is that it was terribly economically unbalanced and unfair in favour of Britain.
Some of the demands of American colonists was of no taxation without representation. France had entered the war in 1778 on the side of the US colonists against the British. As a result of this, British troops were moved out of Ireland to Britain in case of a French invasion. The Irish Parliament couldn't legislate for Irish affairs. Henry Grattan has said, "What is Ireland? It is just a barracks where the British will garrison their troops in times of peace and take them out in times of war."
So George Washington and the lads get together, declare independence, and they write the Declaration of Independence, an amazing document written in the main by Thomas Jefferson. Now the problem was this was coming at the same time as the Age of Reason. So even though the American Revolution is about trade, it also comes up with the Age of Reason that holds that all people are equal. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At the same time, the big enemy, of course, was King George III, after whom the Georgian period is named, and after whom all these towns that we're in now were all built during the Georgian period. George III, of course, reigned for 60 years, and the battle raged on in the American Revolution. That American Revolution emptied the country of troops. The British needed troops over in America to try and keep the territory, and so Ireland was emptied of troops. So Henry Grattan and the rest of those guys set up a private army called the Volunteers, Redcoats. And this private army was used by Henry Grattan, in essence, to change the trade deal with England. They all assembled in College Green, in front of Trinity College, and had cannons and signs saying free trade or else, because Ireland itself was suffering under the same arrangement, where they had to send goods to Britain to send them out anywhere else.
The Irish Volunteer Corps, of which Grattan was a member, were demanding rights for the Irish Parliament and its citizens. In 1781, the decisive Battle of Yorktown in America happened. General Cornwallis was defeated by George Washington.
the Americans finally defeat the British at the Battle of Yorktown, and the general in charge who surrenders is General Cornwallis, who we'll see coming to Ireland for 1798. The loss of America drove King George III mad.
Immediately after the surrender, the British government collapsed. In 1782, legislative independence was won for Ireland. This, however, was a symbolic victory for Ireland, as all Protestants were sitting in Parliament, and Catholics didn't have the right to vote or sit in that Parliament. By 1782, Henry Grattan was becoming increasingly disillusioned. He had felt there was a creeping union between the two countries.
In essence, Henry Grattan was able to get free trade between Ireland and England as a result of this stressful time in Britain's history. Here's Henry Grattan in his red coat uniform. And in essence, what happened is Ireland got a huge measure of independence in 1782. And in fact, it was called the Kingdom of Ireland. Still loyal to King George, but independent pretty much, bar the obvious problems with penal laws and the fact that only 300 men were allowed to run the country. This was the flag of the Kingdom of Ireland. Blue background, harp with a bare-breasted woman.
However, this freedom of 1782, which started a huge Celtic Tiger boom, half of Georgian Dublin, all the buildings you see around you now were built in that time, because free trade allowed loads of money into the country. But as Wolfe Tone, a Protestant who is now Secretary of the Catholic Association, said, you may have this revolution on your hands, but all you've done is quadruple the value of your own boroughs. Meanwhile, 75% of the country are still in penury, are still slaves, and he meant the Catholics and the Presbyterians.
But what happened was the 300 MPs doubled the size of their boroughs, doubled their takings, while 3/4 of the country, the Catholics, were still in slavery.
They had to pay tithes, which was a tax where they were compelled by law to pay for the upkeep of a Protestant church, even if they did not belong to it. In the northeast of Ulster, there were fairly extensive rights to tenants, as long as they paid their rents. The Protestants in the northeast of Ulster were more prosperous than the Catholics in the south. Around 1785, a particularly anti-Catholic form of secret society had made its first appearance in the north. However, it was mostly known as the Peepo Day Boys. Many Catholics were burnt out of their homes, and occupants of those homes were terrorised into moving to some other part of Ireland. Catholics were to form their own society to defend themselves. Their society was known as the Defenders. Wolfe Tone married at 22 and went to London to study law, unsuccessfully. However, he came up with a plan to establish a British colony in Captain Cook's newly discovered islands in the South Seas. He went so far as to present it at Downing Street for the attention of William Pitt, the Prime Minister, but he got no reply. Then he tried to enlist with his brother for military service with the East India Company, but no ships were sailing until the following March. He wrote a pamphlet suggesting that Ireland as an independent nation was not bound to go to war against Spain, even if the British did. The first Tone to settle in Ireland had been a soldier in Cromwell's army. His mother was the daughter of a sea captain in the East India trade. Tone was an attractive, spirited man who enjoyed the pleasures of life, particularly eating and drinking in good company. One of the first acts of the French Revolution was to abolish tithes.
God save the rights of man, give him a heart to scan, blessing so dear. Let them be spread wherever man is found, and with a welcome sound ravish his ear.
After marching to the White Linen Hall, the volunteers and the citizens of Belfast agreed to send a declaration to the National Assembly of France. A month later, a reply was received from Nantes. Liberty or death, citizens of Belfast, you have celebrated that triumph of the human mind.
For the first time, the perceived injustices of land distribution of wealth were really questioned in Ireland. And there were many among the Protestant stock and the Catholic stock, particularly Protestant stock though, who felt that this was inequitable and things had to change. And people who were educated read these ideas and decided that they would like to do something about it. And they founded a society of United Irishmen. There were many peoples, different ethnic groups within the empires of the time, and not just the British Empire, but the French Empire, I suppose the Spanish Empire to a lesser extent, but who had read the works of Thomas Paine, who had read The Rights of Man, who had read the ideas of Enlightenment, which questioned hereditary kingship, absolutist monarchy, who questioned hereditary rule through peership, through titled landed estates.
Wolfe Tone's friend, Thomas Russell, had discussed the political thought in Belfast clubs around 1790. A 30-year-old son of a Presbyterian clergyman was Samuel Neilson. Neilson is seen to be the founder of the society known as the United Irishmen. It was Thomas Russell, in writing to Wolfe Tone, who had asked him to draw up a declaration for his new friends in the north. Wolfe Tone had written 3 resolutions. 1. That English influence in Ireland was the great grievance of the country. 2. That the most effective way to reform it was by a reform of Parliament. And 3. That no reform could be any use unless it included the Catholics. Samuel Neilson had told Wolfe Tone it had to be dropped altogether.
Now, the famous illustration here behind me is depicting the founding members of the United Irishmen. The group was set up of, I suppose, at the beginning, middle class kind of merchants, particularly those from Ulster. They established a group in 1791, and their main aim was to kind of create an independent Ireland where everybody would have the same rights and the same opportunities in life.
Wolfe Tone began thinking about how Protestants were trying to think and act like Irish patriots, yet at the very same time regarding Catholics as not involved with them in Irish patriotism.
But Wolfe Tone at the time was writing, he had just become head of the Catholic Association, but through intervening and becoming a Republican, he had met them and became head of the Catholic Association, and in it he wrote about what's called Grattan's Revolution.
He had addressed it to the Presbyterians of the North, asking them to forget all former feuds, to consolidate the entire strength of the whole nation, and to form for the future but one people. This was the kind of message that Samuel Neilson and other radicals in the secret committee in the North had been trying to get across to ordinary Presbyterian members. France had been a Catholic country, and Wolfe Tone, in his argument on behalf of the Catholics of Ireland, asked Northern Presbyterians who were sceptical about Catholic Church rule over the population to look at France. Where is the intolerance of popish bigotry now? Has not the Pope been burned in effigy in France? Wolfe Tone met the secret committee for the first time on the 14th of October.
So kind of their focus initially was, equality for Catholics, equality for Presbyterians, a more equal society in which all Irish people could serve.
Theobald Wolfe Tone said at the time, our independence must be had at all hazards, and if the men of property will not support us, they must fall. We can support ourselves by the aid of that numerous and respectable class of the community, the men of no property. And by this, Wolfe Tone is saying, well, if the Protestant ascendancy won't help us, if our own kind won't help us, we will have to look to the Catholics to help us.
So for those founding members, the majority of the founding members originally in October 1791 would have been members of the Protestant or Presbyterian religion.
The first open meeting of the United Irishmen took place on the 18th of October 1791. They were a union of Irishmen of all religious persuasions. They wished to counteract English influence in the country, as well as securing a reform of Parliament. Wolfe Tone, when he returned to Dublin, got in touch with a radical known as Napper Tandy. Napper Tandy had been in the Volunteers of 1782. On 9th November 1791, a similar club of United Irishmen to that in Belfast was founded, and Napper Tandy was to take charge of it. Napper Tandy has said, "We have no national government. We are ruled by Englishmen and the servants of Englishmen, whose object is the interest of another country, whose instrument is corruption, whose strength is the weakness of Ireland."
I think what really happened was that the reign of terror initiated in France in 1792 and into 93 by Robespierre, where 16,500 people were guillotined, 2,000 of them in Paris, frightened the European establishment so much that you began to see a crackdown on the United Irish Society and other revolutionary movements, or even possible ideas. People like Thomas Paine, those who had written revolutionary ideas and questioned the order of society.
But he finally is deposed in the French Revolution, so you now have two successful Republican revolutions. Monarchy is no longer the greatest. He's beheaded, and that is the first time a monarch has been beheaded since the Cromwellian Revolution, which was a different kind of thing. This scares every single country in Europe, every single monarchy, every royal family. Marie Antoinette herself is beheaded, his wife. The royal family were beheaded. There was no going back for France. You now had a successful Republican Revolution, both in America and in France.
The newspaper of the United Irishmen, the Northern Star. The Northern Star had even defended the execution of King Louis as the only mode of protecting internal tranquility. In 1792, Wolfe Tone has said that he sank into obscurity in the affairs of the United Irishmen. He was more concerned with agitating for Catholic rights by Keogh's Catholic Committee, of which he became a salaried official.
Meanwhile in Belfast, which, if you can believe it, was then being called the Athens of the North. And it was called the Athens of the North not just because of its wonderful and splendid architecture, but because of the learnedness of the people. And this is where the United Irishmen are founded among Protestants and Presbyterians.
The United Irishmen in 1792 were led by men like Napper Tandy and William Drennan. Other active members in 1792 were two young lawyer brothers from Cork, John and Henry Shears, as well as Beauchamp Bagenal Harvey, who was a wealthy Wexford landowner.
While England went to war with France, her own people were becoming infected with the revolutionary ideas. At the liberal drinking clubs, the clamour was for greater powers for the people.
In Belfast and Dublin, a new cult was formed.
The ideal of United Irish aspirations were very different to the reality of the situation in Ireland at the time. On the 14th of August, he would visit the shipyards with a United Irishman named Henry Joy McCracken. Wolfe Tone is mentioned in his diary. Walk out and see McCracken's new ship, the Hibernia. Hibernia has an English crown on her shield. We all roar at him. The county down getting better every day on the Catholic question. Lurgan, green as usual. Agree to talk the matter over tomorrow when we are all cool. Huzzah! Generally drunk. Viva la nation! Generally very drunk. Bed. God knows how. A major figure in the 1798 rebellion would be Lord Edward Fitzgerald. He had visited Paris in 1792. He had lodged with Thomas Paine and listened to debates in the convention. Fitzgerald had written to his mother from Paris that the energy of the people is beyond belief.
So, fearing this and fearing the French Revolution, Henry Grattan agitates more. He's the constitutional side of things. He's the one who's trying to get it done, you know, the nice legal way. So he agitates more and says, look, if you don't want a French Revolution here, you really have to help the Catholics and all of this kind of thing. So the English grant them a few things. The Catholics can vote. That's brilliant. They can vote. Who can they vote for? The 300 MPs who are already there.
Wolfe Tone and John Keogh applied significant pressure in 1793 for Catholics to be admitted to vote on exactly the same terms as Protestants. The Catholic Relief Act in 1793 was also passed. The Irish Parliament had only voted for the Catholic Relief Act at the request of the British Parliament. Prime Minister Pitt wanted to dampen Irish support for the French Revolution and for the United Irishmen. It fell short of what Wolfe Tone had argued for. Catholics could now vote, but not sit in the Irish Parliament. So the Catholics had to vote for a Protestant. In 1793, Britain went to war with France over the execution of the French King and Queen. The war with France caused huge pressure on Britain in its dealings with Ireland. One of Britain's fears was that the French would invade Ireland and that the Irish would support them.
Of course, the librarian of the Linen Hall Library up in Belfast was Thomas Russell, a former British soldier from Cork, the man from God knows where. This man was the intellectual backbone of the United Irishmen. These people are starting to say, you know something? We need equal rights for everybody, for Protestant, Catholic and Dissenter in Ireland. We no longer want the penal laws. We no longer have an ascendancy. The Linen Hall Library, of course, was a centre of huge business and trade in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, was hugely successful in that trade. They had their own newspaper, the United Irishmen, the Northern Star, an amazing newspaper that went against all prevailing trends at the time.
By the end of 1793, over 200,000 copies of Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man had been circulated in both Britain and Ireland.
It was only when it was banned by the British after war was declared with revolutionary France in 1793 that they drove it underground. So there are a lot of themes which, if you like, the suppression of ideas leads to alternative routes and channels for those ideas. And if society doesn't accept them, the ruling society of the time, they find a way, unfortunately, usually into arms of expressing themselves. And that's what happened.
There's a lot of emphasis put on Wolfe Tone. And he's given credit, more or less, for being the architect of the rebellion. But it's important to remember that neither Wolfe Tone, nor Thomas Russell, nor Samuel Nielsen, who were the founders of the United Irishmen, ever fired a shot.
Could you tell me who were the United Irishmen?
They would have been a combination of liberal Presbyterians, liberal Anglicans, and Catholics. So they were banned in 1794 and driven underground, and it's then they become a secret revolutionary movement, and they begin to move towards an armed revolt. Basically they spread out from Belfast into Antrim and were well established in East Ulster. They spread out from Dublin south into Wicklow, by parish, by barony into Wexford, and out into Munster, Tipperary and Cork. They appealed to young artisans, to, I suppose, the young in general, the tradesmen, to disgruntled aristocrats.
The general population, that would have been sort of the, more or less, the aristocracy, which of course Wolfe Tone, Russell, Nielsen, Robert Sims, of course, was a very important person because he was very wealthy, and he financed a lot of the United Irishmen, and right up until the rebellion took place, at which time he distanced himself from it very quickly.
I, James Hope, in the presence of God, do pledge myself to my country.
The landed gentry and the intelligentsia, they were the people who could afford to think about politics. The other part, the foot soldiers of the United Irish Army, were the Catholic defenders and the local agrarian people who were looking to hold on to their land. So to answer that, there were different types of United Irish men, and also to remember there were United Irish women. There were people like Molly Weston who were also looking for maybe not their independence as women, but looking for independence as Irish people. So they wanted to replace the misrule of Ireland.
They were inspired by, the idea of equality, the idea of a concept of freedom, of equality, of people living together. I mean, it is a really revolutionary, exciting idea, and that's what it appealed to. And young people are very, some people would say, susceptible, or others might say receptive to revolution and the idea of change, where they have a real voice rather than, just the system, being a cog in a machine and so on.
Wolfe Tone was surrounded by spies in Ireland. The naive French spy William Jackson and the double-dealing British spy John Cockayne. Reverend William Jackson had been influenced by the revolution in France and came to Ireland to see if the Irish people would support a French invasion. Wolfe Tone drew up papers for Jackson on the state of Ireland, which he declared as ripe for revolution. Foolishly, Jackson had confided in the lawyer Cockayne, who betrayed him to the British government, and Jackson was arrested on a charge of treason. A leading United Irishman, Archibald Hamilton Rowan, fled the country. The papers of the United Irishmen were seized, and Wolfe Tone was advised to leave Ireland, but remained.
So Wolfe Tone, he was the intellectual force behind the United Irishmen. It's difficult to equally say that he was the intellectual force behind the rebellion because he wasn't present when the rebellion broke out. But Wolfe Tone was arrested, or leastways he was interrogated by a parliamentary committee in Dublin in 1795, and because Bond and Butler, who were also senior people in the United Irishmen at that time, were imprisoned, and Nappertandy had to flee to France, Wolfe Tone was looking at a serious stint in prison himself, but he was offered an opportunity to go to America, as was common in those times. So the British would buy off people.
1795, Jackson's trial took place. He was found guilty. On the morning of his sentencing, Jackson had stepped into the dock looking terribly ill. Jackson's condition steadily worsened throughout the trial. He gripped his sides, shuddering and grimacing in pain. The judge was concerned and asked a doctor to attend him. Jackson then collapsed and died. An autopsy had found that Jackson had ingested a large quantity of a metallic poison. Wolfe Tone had delayed going to America until the trial of Jackson had taken place.
Wolfe Tone goes to America in 1795, which makes, on the advice of a Lord Kilwarden, the Chief Justice of Ireland, who takes a great interest in Wolfe Tone's life. And he says, you better get out of here because they're going to arrest everybody.
And to an extent, that's what happened to Wolfe Tone. People say that Wolfe Tone went to America. He went to America because the English government at the time allowed him to go. His association with Henry John McCracken is only that he went to Belfast to say goodbye to his friends in Belfast before he went to America, and they went onto Cave Hill, 6 or 7 leaders, and they swore that they would fight for the independence of Ireland.
And in 1795 in Cave Hill, they swear to form the United Irishmen and swear that they will oppose English power through force and create a republic in Ireland just like the one in America and in France. This is the beginning of the 1798 rebellion.
And they initially want to fight, agitate for this, pamphleteering, all of this kind of thing. But later on, because of the actions of the government itself, they have to choose violence. And then they do the most important thing of all. They give the Catholic Church, they make it official, they give them a college, Maynooth College. By giving them Maynooth College, they buy the Catholic Church's loyalty, the British government.
And from that day to this, the Catholic Church has been singularly loyal at all times to whatever governing authority was in Ireland, from the British Empire to the Free State to now.
This was the vote and giving Maynooth University were the two elements of bribery meant to buy peace in the country. The same date, 1795, same year, the Irishmen are set up.
On the 21st of September 1795, the Battle of the Diamond took place, which was a planned confrontation between Catholic defenders and Protestant People Day boys near Loughgall, County Armagh. The People Day boys were the victors, killing some 30 defenders, with no casualties in return. As a result of this battle, it led to the foundation of the Orange Order and the onset of the Armagh outrages. The People Day boys had retired to James Sloane's Inn in Loughgall and it was here that James Wilson, Dan Winter and James Sloan would found the Orange Order. The Orange Order was a defensive organisation pledged to defend the King and his heirs. The first Orange Lodge of this new organisation was established in Diane, County Tyrone. In the winter of 1795 to 1796, immediately after the battle, Protestants drove around 7,000 Catholics out of County Armagh. This was known as the Armagh Outrages. Tension had grown over the linen trade. Looms were smashed in Catholic homes to eliminate competition. Defenderism spread throughout Ireland as the Catholics were forced to move.
And this is because the British government want to agitate. They can see the unity going on between Protestant, Catholic and Dissenter, especially in places like Belfast, especially around places like here. And they set up things like the Orange Men, so that there's a sectarian difference, and there are sectarian organisations set up, the yeoman, the militia, all of these things, in order to crush any rebellion that might happen. So Wolfe Tone, 1795, goes to Philadelphia. He lives in America for about a year, but doesn't like it because he goes to try and buy some land, gets screwed out of it by somebody else, and he says to himself, I don't like these Americans, they're all about the money, they're not really about being Republicans at all.
But the government began repressing them immediately. They began cracking down immediately and stopping any kind of organisation. The United Irishmen, this wonderful group, are all proscribed. It's basically illegal to be a United Irishman. These are the 18 leaders of the United Irishmen. And one of the great things I found out was, looking through this, I found out the religion of each one of these leaders. And it's quite surprising. You would think that the United Irish Rebellion and Wolfe Tone and all of that, it was all a Catholic against Protestant thing. It wasn't. When you go through it from Samuel Nielsen down to Lord Edward, it's formed, there's 3 Catholics, 3 Presbyterians and 12 Protestants. This was essentially, the leadership was a Protestant Presbyterian revolution.
That I will use all my abilities and influence in the attainment of an impartial and adequate representation of the Irish nation in Parliament, and as a means of absolute and immediate necessity in the establishment of this chief good to Ireland, I will endeavour to forward a brotherhood of affection, an identity of interests, a communion of power among Irishmen of all religious persuasions.
Jemmy Hope was from Templepatrick in Antrim, and again, like so many of his comrades, they have all these things that sort of bring them all together, similarities with their backgrounds, and Jemmy Hope was a Presbyterian, and he joins the United Irishmen when he's in Antrim, but Jemmy Hope is sent down to Dublin, and he's sent down specifically to organise the workers in Dublin. Now that has again similarities with James Connolly years later, and Jemmy Hope has been compared to a very early version of James Connolly. This man was all about rallying the workers and having an equal society, that the new Ireland would be an Ireland for everyone. So he is sent down 1796 and he settled in Balbriggan Force, and he worked for an Orange man. Jemmy was himself a silk weaver. Now it's apt that he then settles in the Liberties. He's not in Balbriggan for too long. He actually comes to live in the Liberties, and at that time the Liberties was the heart of the weaving trade. This area was full of weavers and connections, industries connected to the weaving industry.
So why was Henry Joy arrested in 1796?
Well, the circumstances around the time when Henry Joy became a United Irishman in the secret society, he threw himself into it full time. And he went around recruiting. He recruited. He was interested in getting Catholics to join the rebellion. Because they felt they needed the numbers. And he struck up a great relationship with Charles Teeling, who was the leader of the Defenders, and the Defenders were an organisation which protected Catholics from the onslaughts of the People Day Boys and the Orange Order, who regularly attacked Catholic homes and burned their homes down. And Henry Joy went about the country neglecting his business, recruiting, and he recruited down as far as Offaly, whereas Russell had been involved in recruiting people in around Down, and that was his main field of operation before he was arrested in '96, and he was captured in Armagh, and he was captured for the same reasons, recruiting to the United Irishmen.
Also in 1796, Lord Edward Fitzgerald had gone to Hamburg and opened up his own approach to the French. He had started detailed negotiations with the French Directory, with Arthur O'Connor, but there was another United Irishman requesting French assistance. In 1796, the United Irishmen reformed. They were now looking to France to support a rising with troops. Wolfe Tone, while in Philadelphia, was questioning the role of democracy in America. While in Philadelphia, Wolfe Tone was in the company of Reynolds, Rowan and Tandy. Tone had gone to Paris to persuade the French government to send an expedition to invade Ireland.
So he moved to France. And of course France is in turmoil all the time since the revolution. They've beheaded their own leaders, Robespierre, all of this. There's now a directory of people. Napoleon is only a general in the army at this point, but the directory, Wolfe Tone goes to meet them.
And he had interviews with Delacroix and Carnot. They were impressed by Wolfe Tone. He was made adjutant general in the French army. Wolfe Tone had drawn up 2 memorials discussing the landing of a considerable French force in Ireland, and that this would be followed by a general rising of the people. Wolfe Tone had frequent conferences at Paris with General Hoche. December 16th, 1796. A great French invading force, 35 ships and 12,000 troops, set sail for the British Isles. The French wanted to invade Ireland, throw out the British with the help of the Irish, and set up an independent Irish Republic. It quietly slipped past the British squadron blockading the port of Brest.
Pike upon your shoulder at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. Put a pike upon your shoulder at the rising of the moon. Out of many a mud the wall capping noise watching through the night, many a manly heart was beating for the blessed morning light. Murmurs ran along the valleys to the banshee's lonely croon, and 1,000 pikes were flashing by the rising of the moon.